So, welcome to Footprints in the Market. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Josh Gamble, who is the Managing Director of ActiveWin. Thank you so much for coming on today, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sharon. Appreciate it.
So, I think definitely within our last couple of seasons, we've had like a gap missing, and that's definitely becoming within that paid media specialist. So, it'd be great to kind of chat to you a little bit more about that today. If you could give us even just a background on your sort of ActiveWin journey in the iGaming industry, just in case people don't know.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working in the iGaming space for about 10, well, it's just over 10 years now. Had a whole different range of hats that I've worn throughout the years, both on the marketing side, the ops side, even at some points looking at like the compliance elements, things working closely with compliance teams. Um, So ActiveWin was essentially started. It was just over a decade ago, and we were set up as the digital marketing arm of Betfred to begin with. And as time went on, we kind of started to diversify our offering, not only in terms of the services that we offer, but also the clients that we were working with. So we're at the point now where we're working with numerous different brands across numerous different platforms, providing not only PPC, paid social services, but also affiliate management, obviously the SEO side of things, and design as well. So we do a lot of UX, CRO, all that sort of stuff as well, which kind of gives us a really good picture in terms of what's going on within the iGaming space, but also outside that space as well.
Amazing. So from an agency side, obviously we're more of the organic specialist, and I think definitely even we go to you as well just for like that paid media advice. So it's
Yeah.
kind of great to kind of have you on to, give some of our listeners some like great takeaways for that. So I thought we'd kick off with like the big question, which is like where the players are in 2025. So within iGaming operators, they're really looking to see a strong ROI in any of the spend that they give you guys. Is it still like a Meta versus Google conversation, or are there any other platforms like Snapchat or Reddit that are gaining any traction?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is obviously the biggest platforms are still the biggest platforms, and they have been for quite a while. When we're looking at the likes of Google, we're looking at the likes of Meta, and there are obviously a lot more emerging channels that are coming out every week. It seems like
Yeah.
from an ROI perspective, a lot of the campaigns that we run, and I think obviously I'm not just saying this because we're running them, but they are profitable campaigns, and I think that's because the background that we've got, the team that we've got, and the knowledge that the team have got, because we've got years worth of data, years worth of experience that we look at and kind of build off the back of. From a Google perspective, it's obviously still one of the highest drivers for really high value, high intent players, essentially. We often find when it comes to PPC side of things, obviously it's a lot more expensive than the likes of any form of paid social channel. But then that player value and the LTV is a lot higher, just because you do kind of get that more educated user and that more educated player who is high intent, as I was mentioning. From a meta perspective, at the moment, we are actually seeing quite a lot of success when it comes to meta. So obviously across the likes of Facebook and Instagram. With that channel, obviously we're looking more top of funnel. So there's the benefits there in terms of the building awareness from a brand perspective, kind of the storytelling, the UGC sort of stuff as well in terms of user generated content.
Yeah.
And with it being more interest based rather than keyword based, I think this is kind of, well, it is obviously where the creative element comes into it and the need for that really strong creative. With the player value side of things on Meta, it is slightly lower than obviously with the likes of PPC, but the cost of acquiring players is equally lower. And we're seeing some really good performance across not only the likes of casino and sports, but also bingo in particular at the moment, which is pretty interesting as well.
I think that sort of led me, I was kind of answering my question a little bit there actually, Josh, to be honest, because what I was going to ask you is how you approach the platform selection when you're launching a new campaign. But I'm kind of guessing from what you're saying, a lot of it's based on what those KPIs and objectives are. So whether it's like a brand building exercise or whether it's like, to drive acquisition.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when we look at kinds of any client that we're working with or any new client that we're on board, and irrespective of whether it's within the iGaming space or outside of it, I think we kind of always take a similar approach where we're looking at not only the purely prospecting side of things, so where we're going
Yeah.
out there and obviously going out with the messaging around the welcome offer and all that sort of stuff. We're essentially trying to create warm audiences, and it sounds very fluffy when you do say it, but essentially trying to create a bit of a halo effect. So when we are talking about like the organic side of things tying into the paid side of things and alongside all the UX and important CRO stuff, what we're trying to do is trying to create as much of a brand presence as we possibly can do. So we'll probably look at it in kind of three pillars. So first and foremost, we'll look at the brand piece. So if you're a new brand and people aren't aware of who you are, we need to get that brand out there so people become familiar, and then that familiarity will start to build trust, which will hopefully and should essentially start to drive down that overall CPA or that overall CPL. And I think when we're looking at launching campaigns, it's very rare that we'll just do it across one channel, just purely for the fact that we want to be able to hit users and target users across these different platforms, but also leverage all the data that those platforms give us in order to be able to drive down that CPA for the clients at the end of the day.
Is there any sort of like use cases or examples you can think of where like you did rely on something like Snapchat or Reddit quite heavily, or is it much more of a complementary part of the overall approach?
Yeah, I think it is. It's slightly more complementary than kind of launching purely on one of these channels. I think in the old days, it used to be a case of you could just run with purely PPC or you could just run with purely the paid social side of things. And you mentioned there the likes of Snapchat and the likes of Reddit. I think Reddit in particular is one that's really interesting to us at the moment and something that we've been running quite a lot on and seeing decent success from both a prospecting perspective, but also from a brand perspective. I think the kind of user base of those particular platforms is different to what you get across the likes of Google and the likes of paid social as well. Sorry, the likes of Meta as well. Like there was some statistic the other day, and it's part of the package that Reddit keep firing out to everyone, where they're talking about how the usership of that platform differentiates from all these other platforms. And I think it was something around 60% of the users that are on Reddit aren't actually on any of the other platforms. So essentially, as marketeers, and you'll know this as well, we're always trying to find new ways of reaching different eyeballs, and especially in a market that's as saturated as the iGaming space is.
And what do you kind of say to clients who want to go broad versus those who want to go hyper targeted within their campaigns? Do you think there's like room for both, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's very much down to the platform as well, because I think when we're looking at different types of target, and obviously from a broad target and a top of funnel perspective, that's where Meta's great because obviously you can build that awareness, whereas with Google you're able to be a lot more niche when it comes to your audiences. So some of the areas that we've seen success is kind of looking at different games categories, looking at particular games, bidding on those particular longer tail keywords, where it might not be the case that you get the volume, but we often do see when we approach it in that way that we do kind of get that value from these longer tail keywords. And as I mentioned before, it's kind of looking at the brand itself, where the brand is in terms of its journey as well. Because if it's a well-established brand, there's not the need for these massive brand pieces to be going out there. Because if you're a household name, obviously it makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah. And I think as well, creative's obviously something that's very important within, within the whole ad journey as well. But because of like, the sort of safer gambling restrictions within that, it can restrict you a little bit in what you guys do. So what does a high converting compliant ad look like in 2025? Like,
Yeah,
what does that visual look like?
it's very different to kind of what it was back in the day or when I first started in the industry. And I think you used to be able to kind of not get away with a lot more, but you
Yeah,
had a lot more freedom. And I think the
definitely.
importance of kind of that thumb stop and creative, as everyone keeps referring to it now, is massively important because especially with the way the platforms are going and those platforms that are creative driven in terms of the likes of Meta and whatnot,
Yeah.
there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of competition. The only way that you're going to stand out, first and foremost, is obviously through your target and through the offering that you've got. But
Mhm.
secondly, the only way to cut through the noise is with that strong creative. Ever since day one, when I first started working in the industry, it was always a case of we had kind of a checklist in place where it was compliance, offer, and imagery. And
Okay.
obviously, dependent on which side of the commercial spectrum you sat, the order of those will be in different priorities.
Yeah.
But I think understanding kind of the platform specific guidelines is massively important. we we've been doing this long enough to obviously be in a position where it's a case of we know what's going to get approved and we know what will most likely get rejected. And I think having that understanding of what works on Facebook versus what works on Snapchat versus what works on Instagram is massively important. I think kind of using like that visually bold and engaging imagery is key as well. We've always done a lot of A/B testing, and I think that's something that's massively important in terms of not only the sort of creators, but the offer wording and all that sort of stuff
Yeah.
as well. And that kind of ties into the overall focus on like the user experience and kind of how we portray not only the offering but also the entertainment value alongside everything that you need in there in order to be compliant and make sure that you are protecting that player. Because I think especially probably talking like 10, 12 years ago, you were seeing a lot of talk about cash and big wins and all this sort of stuff. And obviously we're limited in terms of what we can say there now. So it's more about that kind of engagement and how we can show the use the value of the product and the value of what we can bring as a brand to the table. Because the last thing that we want to do is be in a position where we're looking at kind of platform bans, brand damage, and kind of like that longer term fallout from poorly monitored and poorly managed campaigns.
I think as well, what you don't want is like creative fatigue. Do you know what I mean? I think depending on obviously the brand and the platform, what you don't want to do is like I've definitely seen it from some operators that there's like just this oversaturation of like promotional based ads that are
Yeah.
just constantly out and it's all got the same message. It might have a different color or it
Yeah.
might have a different whatever, but all effectively portraying the exact same thing without that creative element
Well,
attached to it.
that's it, and it's kind of what we were saying before in terms of finding that creative that cuts through the noise a little bit. Like because we work in the industry and because I'm constantly looking at
Yeah.
different platforms, looking at different brands, you get hit with so many of these retargeting ads, and probably 80% of them look the same. There's probably 4 or 5 brands out there that are producing really unique creative. And I think we'll all be aware of which brands we're talking about because they are the ones that are cutting through the noise and they are the ones that are starting to position themselves as a tier like higher tier two, if not tier one operator. Um, and there's ways and means of doing so, and obviously the way in which you do that's down to the brand itself, but also us working closely with whether it's our creative teams or creative teams at the brand itself to be able to produce something that does stand out in that really noisy environment.
I think you mentioned that you're doing obviously quite a lot of like A/B testing just to monitor the performance of campaigns. Have you spotted any particular ad formats that are performing particularly well, like in terms like against others like reels or static carousels? Because I
Yeah.
think sorry, on you
So
go, Josh.
So no, I was just going to say it's a combination of both really, and it varies from brand to brand. And I think dependent on the platform as well, it always differs. Like there was probably a period about 2 or 3 years ago where everyone was like, "Yeah, short form video. It's got to be short form video." Everyone was talking about like 6 second animations or wherever it is. And we found as time goes on, obviously trends fluctuate and the kind of way that people are engaging with and absorbing content differs as well. So it's just a case of we're constantly tweaking and changing what we've got and iterating on whether it is some videos that we've got live, whether it is some static imagery that we've got live, or whether you're looking at particularly on the likes of Meta when we're looking at carousels or anything like that, what messaging we can use across those images to portray the value proposition essentially. And that's why it's important, as I mentioned before, to always be kind of a little bit agile with the way in which you approach things and with the creatives. And I think as long as we're balancing that kind of responsible messaging alongside the acquisition goals, the platforms aren't going to penalize you in any way either.
That was actually my very next question, Josh, as well. So that's brilliant in terms of like that responsible gambling messaging because obviously it's becoming tighter in terms of regulations. Are you finding that like a challenge to create that balance of making really, really good campaigns and creating really, really good assets, as well as that balance of, the need for responsible messaging, or are you thinking is it becoming quite natural as part of the evolution?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much second nature now. Like we've been really fortunate to work with compliance teams who understand it and get it, not only from obviously from a compliance perspective, but also tying the commerciality into there, because the last thing that you want to do is just overall people with information, but we want to be making sure that we've got those key bits across within the messaging. So obviously integrating that safer gambling messaging, highlighting kind of the game features and the bonuses, the community aspects, rather than just purely emphasizing the free bets or the free spins or the big wins essentially. And I think because we've got the partnerships within these compliance teams and with the compliance teams that we work with, where they're kind of keeping us abreast of everything that's going on within the space or any changes, alongside the relationship with the platforms themselves who are imposing these changes. It kind of gives us the confidence knowing that what we're actually doing is the right way of doing things, and we've been doing that for a number of years now, because obviously we work within regulated spaces, and if we get accounts closed down or anything like that, that'll
Yeah,
reflect not only really badly on us as an agency, but also massively impact the client's P&L. And I think when we're working with particular agencies, working with particular clients, it's very much a case of, as fluffy as it sounds, we become an extension of them.
yeah.
So we want autonomy and we want kinds of responsibility for that area. And if we're messing it up, we're not doing our jobs properly. And obviously, the last thing that we want to do is be impacting anyone's P&L at the end of the day.
I think you're right. I think if there's one constant in paid media, it's change because there is just so many policy changes and platform shifts, and it looks like you guys have obviously got the right partners in place, so obviously to kind of make sure that you guys are ahead of that and ahead of like algorithm updates as well. But can you think of any like major updates that have happened recently that's kind of shook things up and how you've had to pivot and maybe like re-strategize and realign and recalibrate?
Yeah, I think probably, well, the biggest one that's upcoming and kind of been come for a while is the privacy updates, the
Hmm.
iOS privacy updates, and kind of the deprecation of third party cookies and how we need to shift with that. Obviously, over the last like 10 years, there's been all sorts of different changes that have gone on where it's a case of we've had to adapt quite quickly. And
Yeah,
I think it's important in terms of us remaining agile, but with kind of the shift towards that first party data, there's a lot of plans in place, and I'm sure everyone else who works within the space is planning accordingly as well, and started to roll out changes where it's a case that there's going to be more importance on first party data. And as I mentioned before, one of the benefits of us kind of becoming an extension of the clients that we work with is we have that relationship where we can start to have these conversations around first party data, start to kind of put more emphasis on closely aligning with the teams internally and getting the accessibility to that data.
yeah.
In terms of like not only the user behavior, deposit history, session frequency, and all that sort of stuff, but all those kind of key data points that'll then allow us to build out more accurate audience segmentation as part of our campaigns as well.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think then is for you, is it really, really important for like the operator partner or even the affiliate to have like the correct CRM integration and tech in place their end in order to kind of like help you with this first party data?
Yeah, massively. I think obviously within the gaming space, there's so many different metrics that we'll be looking at in terms of judging how successful a campaign is, and we can kind of manage it up to a certain point. But if the partner's not integrated with the right platforms, or if they haven't got accessibility to that data, or if they're not feeding that data back, so we've got that kind of full feedback loop, it just makes our jobs harder as
Yeah.
paid marketers to actually make things work, because at the end of the day we've got no real visibility in terms of what that ROI actually looks like. So we could
Yep.
look at a campaign and say, for example, oh yeah, we're delivering casino FTDs for £60,
Yep.
but if those players are only depositing a tenner and then going on and not doing much else after that, that campaign's not a success. But if we don't get that visibility from the operator side, it just makes our lives so much more difficult, because we can't truly judge what's success and what's not.
I think as well, even from like the conversion standpoint, like I know even from like an organic side, from an agency, what we found is that post-click optimization can be, a challenge. So, you've got all the traffic to the site, but they're not converting. How do you guys kind of manage that, like from a paid media perspective? So like you're funneling all this traffic there, but you've got an operator that's just not got like the correct, landing page, the correct UX in order to kind of get that over the line.
Yeah, well, to be fair, at the moment we're really fortunate in terms of the brands that we work with because we are working really closely with the different brands and the different platforms. And I think you mentioned there like that kind of post-click experience and how important that is becoming because essentially what we're doing, whether it be from an affiliate perspective, whether it be from a paid media perspective, it's only as effective as the next step after that click. So obviously, if
Yeah,
we're sending loads of players who are going through in the register and then they're depositing, but then they're having a terrible journey after that point,
yeah,
it's going to impact how successful our campaigns look at the end of the day and what their ROI looks like. I think within the iGaming space, obviously there's a huge amount of competition anyway, and
yeah.
there's quite a lot of kind of user drop off. So
Mhm.
optimize that alongside dev teams, alongside CRM teams, working with the guys from a CRO perspective and a UX perspective is going to help us massively improve that kind of the ROI and the LTV of those players. And I think looking at kind of the post click on the ads, obviously tailored landing pages are massively important. Making sure creatives, offers, all that sort of stuff aligns, and make sure those landing pages are optimized to actually convert. Looking at kind of streamline registration flows as well, so kind of short mobile first forms, even stuff on some of the social pages. Oh, sorry, some of the paid social channels where it's a case of we can get data pulling through so that some of the forms are auto filled, streamlining that journey again. So making social sign-ups and pre-fill fields where possible obviously helps a conversion because it just smooths that experience down right to the easiest way it can possibly be. Even stuff like trust signals as well. I think massively help. So when we're working with brands, or before we start working with brands, one of the first things that we'll look at is kind of the reviews of not only the brand but also the platform, and making sure that everything's set up for kind of the best chance for success. As obvious as it may seem,
Yeah,
there's a lot of brands out there and a lot of platforms out there that people aren't having good experiences with. So irrespective of how good the traffic is that we're sending,
yeah,
if those players aren't going to have a good experience, it kind of makes our lives a lot more difficult from the get go. And then, like we were saying before, in terms of the CRO side of things and A/B testing, I think post click looking at kind of using heat maps, all different A/B testing tools. So we use a few, including like the likes of VWO and a few others, to analyze the activity and obviously test what's going on there. And then also we've got an analyst team internally who are looking at the data and kind of working with the other brands and the brands that we work with to kind of do a full funnel analysis and see what's going on there, see where the drop off is, and see how we can work with the CRM teams to kind of help plug that a little bit.
I think like see, even just based on what you're saying there, it sounds like you guys need to be like both really, really proactive in your approach, but also like really reactive in it, depending on and what that data is that you get through. How do you build that like agility in your team? Is it like tech? Is it just mindset? Is it training? How do you
Yeah,
create like that agile marketing team that's able to adapt all of that?
I think we're obviously because we do specialize within the gaming space. It's always kind of something that we've had to be good at and
Mhm.
something that we've got to be aware at. Whether that's a case of like changing offers quickly, or there's a particular promotion that's only live for a few hours and we've got to pre-plan that and get it live. But then there will always be shifts in terms of rapid shifts in regulation, changes in platform algorithms as well, which is obviously a big one, and changes in the ad
Yeah,
policies itself. And I think with that, it's a combination of obviously being aware of what's going on within the industry. So I mentioned before,
Mhm.
we're quite fortunate in terms of the relationships that we've got within the iGaming space, but also the relationships that we've got with the clients that we work with and their compliance teams, who are a lot more up to date than performance marketing teams will be in terms of the changes that are going on in regulation. So having that regular communication and kind of touch points with those guys is massively important for us. But then also, if there's changes within the algorithm or changes within the ad policies, because of the way that the guys work and obviously how regularly they're in the accounts looking at stuff and optimizing stuff on a day-to-day basis, we can kind of spot performance dips quite early on,
yeah,
before kind of any budget's wasted, which is massively important. Um, and then in terms of like the wider picture, I think looking at avoiding kind of creative fatigue and audience burnout, but also capitalizing on real-time events is massively important. So that regular kind of change in terms of the creatives that we use and pre-planning for any events that are coming up, but making sure that once we know that an ad frequency is reaching a particular level, we're
Yeah.
then in a position to quickly flip that creative out without kind of changing or losing any of that brand equity and the brand messaging that we've been building up throughout those campaigns.
Perfect. And I was just thinking as well, see about like emerging markets and demographics. Is there any like sort of specific geos or player segments that you think are like ripe for smarter paid acquisition that would help give like an operator a first mover advantage coming up?
I think when it comes to kind of regulated markets, you're
Yeah.
always beholden to the platforms themselves
Mm,
from a media perspective. Obviously, within the game and the gambling space, there's a lot of people who are operating within like the grey and black markets, doing a lot of
yeah.
black hat PPC or all that sort of stuff, and it's not really something that we touch on. But I think when it comes to the platforms themselves, it's making sure that we've got those relationships in place with these platforms in terms of, say, for example, with the Philippines just regulating, having closed down a load of the grey market operations out there, making sure that we're in constant contact with the platforms in order to be able to make sure once the platform's able to push these particular geos, we're in place and we're in the right spot to be able to onboard these brands, get them live and get them live as soon as we possibly can do once the platform allows.
Well, I've got a couple of wrap up questions for you, Josh, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So the first one is if you had to give one golden rule for scaling smarter with paid media and iGaming, what would it be?
For what? Sorry, Sharon, you broke up a little bit there.
Sorry, if you had to give one golden rule for scaling smarter with paid media and iGaming, what would that be?
I think it's kind of a combination of what we've spoke about
Yeah.
really in terms of, for me, it's the visibility on the data.
Mhm.
Um, I think within the gaming and gambling space, it's a lot more difficult than non-regulated industries, but also industries that aren't as competitive to scale, just because
Yeah.
there is that much noise. And without the full visibility of that data, without the full visibility of kind of what's working, their audience segmentation, and an understanding of kind of your targeting, it's never really going to work. So I think the data element is key, and also the creative element, and just making sure that you've got that kind of thumb stopping creative, as we were saying before, to really cut through the noise.
Perfect. And the last one's more kind of journey specific, Josh, based on your time in iGaming. Do you remember any piece of advice that anybody's ever given you within the iGaming space that really resonated with you that you would pass on to any of our new listeners and that are sort of emerging into our industry?
Yeah, and to be fair, I've been really lucky throughout my kind of journey within the iGaming space, and I've worked with some really obviously some really impressive people, and I think the exposure side of things is something that's always kind of been massively important. So when I first started, I worked in marketing before, but never worked within the iGaming space. And I remember walking into a boardroom full of people who knew exactly what they were talking about, and I was a young
Yeah.
kid. And before I went in, one of our managers at the time just kind of looked at me and said, "Back yourself because you're asking the right questions." And I think it's kind of that's industry agnostic. It doesn't matter where you are, but I think
Yeah.
when you're going into an environment like that, or any environment, whether it's doing something like this where we're talking about, even though we're meant to be experts within the space,
Yeah.
it's always a case of you've got that knowledge there, and if you don't put it forward, no one's going to actually know that. So I think that was probably one of the main pieces of advice that I've received that's really kind of resonated and stuck with me is just back yourself, and kind of believe in what you're saying because you're knowledgeable at the end of the day and you
Yeah.
understand what you're talking about. You've got all this experience. And if you don't actually put those thoughts forward, you're just going to shrink into the back of the room, essentially.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Josh. I really, really appreciate it. I know I've learned something, so I'm sure our listeners will definitely will have too. So thank you so much. And thanks for again for coming on Footprints in the Market.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Sharon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.